Hey, Boaz here with Next Pittsburgh. We are starting a new series this year. We're calling it Yinzer Backstage Pass, where we're looking sort of behind the scenes of various Pittsburgh landmarks. And right now, we are in the courtyard of the East Liberty Presbyterian Church, and we're here to chat with Pastor Randy, who's the senior pastor here. Thanks for having us.
It's a great pleasure to show people around the church.
And I know that here in the courtyard, you said they were filming a Netflix series just now.
Literally last week, we had Netflix here for a series called The Pale Blue Eye, and I think it involves Custer and West Point, and this looks like West Point to them, so they had people on the sidewalk, this pathway, and in the courtyard. We've had other movies here, Last Witch Hunter and a few others were filmed here, but it was a lot of fun to see all the Hollywood folk.
And you said Christian Bale was here?
Yeah, Christian Bale was the main person I recognized. I probably need to have a long list of who the others were, but yeah, it was great fun.
That's so cool. Well, it is freezing, so let's go inside and see
inside.
some of the indoor parts of the church.
So the courtyard, actually, we use it for worship in the summer, so we take advantage of it. But we're going to move into the chapel, which is a smaller worship space for us. And it's important because it's part of our church's history. The building that we're in actually is the fifth building that the congregation's had over the years. But when they decided to create this most recent church, it meant tearing down a lovely church, a church that had been built in the 1880s, was only about 50 years old, but they decided they wanted to do a new church. And so they saved the pews, they saved some of the windows, and they created this space as a bit of a reminder of the previous church to appease the congregation that was losing a beloved structure and waiting for this new stone cathedral to be built.
Wow, and you were pointing out earlier over here, you see the Heinz's dedicated one of these windows 100 or so years ago.
Yeah, so it was very common not only to connect with the important families in the community, but they would dedicate a window in honor. So the Heinz family gave this window, and then actually carved in the wall are dedications for the prior pastors. So I'm actually the 11th pastor of this church, but the church goes back to 1819, so we just had our 200th anniversary.
Do you know a lot about your predecessors?
I know a moderate amount. The main person I would name would be Dr. Hutchinson. Dr. Hutchinson was the pastor here in the 30s when this cathedral was built. And so the story goes that the Mellon family, Richard and Jenny King Mellon, came to Dr. Hutchinson and the church leaders and said, "We want to build a cathedral in honor of our mothers." And the church leaders initially said no, because if we build something that big, we can't maintain it.
Yeah.
But they talked back and forth, and so the Mellon family gave just under $4 million in 1930, and they brought in the best.
John pointed out that was like right around the Great Depression also. So that's sort of a crazy sum of money.
It's a huge amount of money, but again, the big families in town were doing that, the Carnegies and the Fricks and the others. So I don't know if it was a competition, but they really want to do this in honor of their mothers. So they give this money, they bring in the best architect in the country, Ralph Adams Cram, and basically gave him a blank check. And so he brought in his stonemasons, his wood carvers, his stained glass companies, and in just under 5 years, they built this entire church from the ground up. They dug down 2.5 floors and built up, and we're about 200,000 square feet.
Wow, and this room it starts with an N, I forgot.
So this is called the narthex. The narthex in cathedrals and in large churches is an entryway. Now in the Catholic tradition, you're baptized first before you enter into the actual sanctuary. In the Protestant tradition, you're baptized as part of worship. So if this was a Catholic church, this might have been a place where a baptismal font would be found. It's a gathering place. It's a place where people would shake off the snow and hang up their coats. But it's modeled after one of the eating clubs in Oxford in England. And so they brought in these giant doors made of teak and carved it. And around the edges are flowers from the different countries related to the time of the Reformation. So there's thistles, and there's shamrocks, and there's calla lilies, and there's English roses. So again, there's an incredible attention to detail.
Yeah, it's wild. And maybe I'm just a newbie, so I don't know this, but what is the difference between a cathedral and a church?
So here's where we have played a little fast and loose with language. Officially, a cathedral is a place where there's a bishop. And so ultimately, Episcopal and Catholic churches can have a cathedral where their bishop is posted. Well, Presbyterians don't have bishops. And so the name cathedral for us is a little more of just a way to acknowledge the grandeur of the place. And one of the phrases we use for the church is Cathedral of Hope. So we're not officially a cathedral in that there's no bishop, but the church looks like one.
Right. I mean, it looks very much so, and I guess they were inspired by the cathedrals of Europe.
Yeah. So the architect, if you've been to Princeton University, the architect did their chapel. He also did Calvary Episcopal Church back in the 1920s. So the same architect has copied some of those features, but in this church, he called it the crowning achievement. He was able to bring in and expand the vision to a proportion that he'd never used before. So it's easily one of the grandest, I don't know if it's absolutely the largest, but one of the grandest churches in Pittsburgh.
And this, well, you just pointed this out to me before, so I was sort of shocked to realize that people are buried right here in the church.
Yeah, so the Mellon family, after donating money for the church, obviously had very close ties to the church as it was being built. But unfortunately, Richard Mellon died before it was finished. And then his wife, Jenny King, died within about 3 years after it was completed. And so to honor them and to recognize their contribution, and as part of their wishes, this chapel was built and attached onto the church, and it literally is the burial place for Richard on this side and then his wife, Jenny King, on the other. So on Easter and on Christmas, the family still has set up a donation to make sure that there are fresh flowers in this chapel every year. So it's a great quiet place, particularly for when we have Wednesday prayer services or quieter times. It's a lovely gathering place, but it doesn't really serve a function. We don't use it liturgically very much, but it's a great space.
And the carving, I mean, again, is just wild, the detail of all these little figures carved into the stone.
Yeah, so the stonemasons, there was no way we could probably replicate this degree of artistry anymore. On Jenny King's casket, where she's buried, on the stone are carved what are attributed as feminine virtues, and then on Richard's are more male virtues, and they're given a representation. Don't forget, throughout history, cathedrals, most of the people coming to worship couldn't read. So the cathedral in the windows and in the architecture and the carvings was basically the library of the faith. And people would then learn the faith from what they saw depicted in the windows and in the carvings.
That's wild. I mean, they're just like these comics, almost explanatory comics in these windows and carvings.
It's like a graphic novel in stone.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So we're going to move back in the sanctuary. Sanctuary holds, it depends on the size of the people and the number of people, but we comfortably would have about 900 to 1,000 people fit in the space. We've had as many as 1,500. When the symphony was struggling a couple years ago, the brass did a concert here, and we squeezed in 1,500 people. They were up in the balcony. They were peering down from above. We use this space not only for worship, but for concerts and special programs, community events. So our main service is here, and then we have another service earlier on Sunday mornings that's more contemporary in our social hall, and then we have a Wednesday service in the chapel where we were earlier.
How tall are the ceilings here?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's about between 70 and 90 feet, depending on where you stand.
Wow.
So where you're standing, in the center aisle of a sanctuary, this area is called the apse. And then the cathedrals are done in the shape of a cross, typically. And so the cross aisles and the cross sections are called the transepts, and then the front is called the chancel. Now again, in a Catholic church, typically that's the altar, and the priests are the only people up there. In a Protestant church, though, it's an open space, so the choir loft is up here. People come up here for baptisms, for communion. I'll preach from the pulpit there on the side, and we actually have programs here. We have a yoga class that meets right here because it's such a meditative space. They really enjoy using it.
And I know you pointed out some cool details in the woodworking as well.
Yeah, so all these chairs and the carvings are original, and the wood carvers at times would get bored because they had to do such repetitive work. And so we noticed several years ago there was always stories that there was things hidden in the carving. And so in this one here, one of the wood carvers actually put in a small church mouse. And being Presbyterian, we've named him Calvin. So, so Calvin the mouse is here. There's another one over the organ. And it's one of those things we just tell the kids, keep your eyes open. You might find more of them.
Yeah. Like, how much do you think that the services and the activities happening in this building have changed, in the past 90 years?
Oh, well, when this church was built, there was probably 2,500 members. And East Liberty was a very affluent area, but mixed. The Greensburg Pike, that's now Penn Avenue, was always, and it was designed to be a wide street. And for years, that area was the third largest business district in all of the state, behind downtown Philadelphia and downtown Pittsburgh. Wow. There were 7 theaters. The trolley line went straight down Penn Avenue. So the church was always in the heart of things. In the 70s, there was a terrible urban redevelopment plan that tore down a lot of the infrastructure, and East Liberty began to struggle. So the church shifted from being this place of the affluent families with ushers and mourning coats to much more a community church. We're now racially mixed. We're about 1/4 African American, about 5% Latino, Native American, and Asian American. We have all economic ranges and all ages. So the church, I think, has grown more fully into the gospel and moved from being a status place that it might have been. I'm going to show you one other thing back here, Boaz, before our time runs out.
So what area are we going into right now?
So this is called an ambulatory. An ambulatory is a walkway behind a chancel. In any big cathedral or church, you have to have a way to get from one side to the other without visibly crossing the main worship area. And so they would always put in the walkways behind the chancel.
This is sort of the backstage, I guess, essentially.
It is. And the robing room around the corner is also a green room, in effect, for when there's special actors here. Another little detail, even the hand railings, these are all aluminum. And again, in the 1930s, with Alcoa starting, aluminum was only just beginning to be used as a construction material. Huh. But again, who would go to this trouble of that level of detail in a handrail? Well, what's of note back here is that then this became a place to commemorate the prior pastors, people that were instrumental in the early years of the church. And so they would do these bronze plaques. And the kids have always commented that they're a little spooky. They think the eyes follow you. But like the earliest pastor, John McIlvaine, was here for almost 40 years. Wow. And so it was very common to commemorate them. This acknowledges the Negley family, who were the people that donated the land back in the 1800s.
Have you had your sitting for your bronze cast yet?
Unfortunately, they're not still following this tradition. So I'm not sure what my kids would think of if I was following them around in life and in death with my eyes. And then our church not only started this congregation, but started at least 6 other churches over the years. And over time, some of them flourished and some of them did not and folded back in. And so when they folded back in, they would bring their memorial plaques, and they also were installed back here in the ambulatory.
And there's still so much to see. We're seeing like a tiny percentage of this building today just because in this amount of time we can't even walk around the whole building.
Right. There's so you're on the main floor. There are 2 more floors above this one. One is used mostly for Sunday school classes, and one is part of our Hope Academy. We have a program here called Hope Academy of Music and the Arts, where over 350 kids and their families come for music instruction.
Wow.
They learn stage plays and Shakespeare monologues, and they learn instruments. So that's a big part of our church life. And then below that, there's our social hall, and down in that area, there's a full gymnasium, and there's also a bowling alley. Because in the 1930s, the churches were the source of the social activity for the community. So the Y across the street, the old Ace Hotel, the Y had a swimming pool, so they didn't thankfully put one in here, but they did put in a duck pin bowling alley that's still used today.
Wow. And if people want to get a tour of the church, they can. You offer those, right?
Yeah, so come by the church, come in the Highland entrance. We have some brochures there, and people can walk around. But usually twice a month after the Sunday worship service, we'll have a tour guide here, and we'll pick out a part of the church. And sometimes we go up in the tower, sometimes we go down and show people the boilers, and other times we just explore more of the history of this space.
And do you have a favorite corner or room in the church?
Well, it's hard to beat simply being right here in the chancel. I mean, the view back across the space is one that I'm blessed to be able to see every week. And so it's a reminder of just the legacy that built this church and the rich tradition, the rich 200 years of work that's all a part of this place.
Awesome. Well, Pastor Randy, thank you so much for showing us around. This has really been amazing.
It's been great to be one of your initial backstage passes, so I'll look forward to your other programs.
Yeah, next time we'll be back here going bowling with you.
That'll be great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. See you next time.